Next, from Maryland, we speak with National Security Consultant Lt Col Tony Shaffer as we discuss the changing nature of threats to American national security and how the response to these threats changed from President Obama to President Trump. Colonel Tony Shaffer, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. I'm sure our viewers have seen you a million times on Fox. You're a frequent contributor there as far as your opinions, and we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Let's start off, what is the difference in national security that you've been involved in your career? What's the difference as we have transitioned from the Obama administration to the Trump administration in your mind?
Right, I think two things. First, President Trump has made it very clear that his intention is to actually use the massive economy that the United States generates as a tool of foreign policy. Now, let me explain that. When he says America first, it's all about making sure that we are able to enable the American worker. The idea is we should be manufacturing, we should be producing things and leading the world economy. So much under Obama was a service economy. The idea is we are consumers. I don't think that's what we want to do. I think big labor recognized that they were not being taken full advantage of regarding the ingenuity and capability of the American worker. And I think that's where I've seen President Trump make great inroads. Secondly, relating to the actual application of American power. The idea here is that we do not want to be an imperial power, we want to be a cooperative power. When he talks about NATO, he's not abandoning NATO, he's saying, you're our partners, you should be paying your fair share. So all of these things, I think, have been badly misinterpreted by the mainstream media. I think, indeed, the idea of America first has to do with how do we then create conditions for global success, not sit back and hope for the best. And you have to remember, President Obama's mantra was hope and change. President Trump's idea is action and innovation. And I think that's where you see a great departure and why the economy is now linked to national security, because frankly, that's the best thing he could do to help us be successful as a nation.
One of the things that just happened was that the Pentagon finally got a big boost in spending. They had been really damaged by sequestration over the last 2 or 3 years. As you, knowing what you know about where we are in the Defense Department and our build-out, and so two questions, where are we? And secondly, are we ever, in your mind, making the mistake of looking how many tanks and planes we have when maybe it's the cyber threat that might be more of a threat and we're fighting the last war rather than the future war?
Your last point is completely spot on, yes. I feel we have to have an effective defense, not an expensive defense. And to that point, I think we are funding far too many legacy programs looking at how we won the last war, not looking at how do we do cyber, do the adaptation of technology to gain advantage, not relive the last war. So I do admire and respect General Mattis. He's a great man. General Joseph Dunford couldn't be a better man for the chairmanship of the Joint Chiefs. With that said, I think they're both hobbled by the legacy of the enterprise. And so much of what we're funding still reflects old programs, and we have not done a cleansing or basically a zero-based review of everything, basically justifying everything. I was talking to a former member of the Trump White House, and he was saying when they were briefed on all these programs, no one could actually stipulate, okay, this is the program, this is what it costs. But what is it doing to benefit the American people? That question was never even thought of by the briefers. So this is where we need to go back and look at what are we buying, what is the inevitable use of it, if any, and if it's not, how do we then adapt that to the future? So these are things that are being worked. We're not there yet, but I have confidence over the next 3 years we'll continue to have progress.
In covering government for 25 years or so, it seems to me one of my critiques is that government is so many times reactive and not proactive. They don't look down the road. They don't think. One of the real concerns I would have, and I don't know enough to quantify the concern, is whether we are protecting enough the grid and what is happening, if any, and can we get our utilities to take this seriously? Because they don't want to invest in something millions and millions of dollars that they may never get any return on investment on. And then would you include in your answer, as they're a money-making enterprise, should we ask them to be making that burden, or should we indirectly say that is the role of government to step up to protect all the people and the entire economy, because if we lose the grid, we're out of business.
Right. Well, let me start with the last part of your question first. The Army and other military elements do believe fundamentally that it's their job to protect everything. With that said, there's a number of political hoops in the way. I just, surprisingly enough, came from a meeting with Ambassador Hank Cooper, who's been working this issue, who was he was a member of the Graham Commission looking at the whole EMP issue over the last few years of the Obama administration. And the honest answer is, we all know, based on our own military planning, that EMP is a specific threat. The problem is the utilities are not convinced, and the results of the Graham Commission, which studied this, the Pentagon does not want to release. But I can tell you in those findings, it will instruct the people running the grid, the FERC and the NERC, that these are the things you must do to harden it and protect it. And let me say this, if you don't have power, you don't have cyber. You can't think about cyber operations if you can't actually power a computer. So there's a group of us, to include Ambassador Cooper and myself, who are working this behind the scenes. And the answer is, you can fund it through 2 cents a person per month to actually harden the grid. And the consequence of not accepting this.
Now, where does that number come from? That's an interesting number.
It's basically
it's an estimate on what it would cost and how many clients.
The entire hardening of the grid would probably cost between $8 to $100 billion over a period of time. And to spread the wealth around, you give it to the.
I will tell people that's out of a $4 trillion federal budget, so it's not really a lot of money.
It's nothing. And the idea here, and you said, what's the economic issue? Well, the economic issue, if you have the grid fail, the Canadians have seen, for example, a high-level pulse from natural. The Toronto got hit by a pulse of EMP from the sun, from a sunspot, and it took down their grid and the power for several days. It cost them $10 to $20 billion. So the idea here is you're basically buying some level of protection from that. So the idea here is you want to harden the grid so you don't have these issues. And again, the economy stops. The moment that happens, the grid goes down.
And it's not just the economy. We're going to lose lives. We're going to have people in hospitals on ventilators and not going to run. And if you're running on backup systems, you're only going to have fuel for those for so long. Right. So we'll come to a grinding halt.
So the idea here is, yes, several of us are looking at this. This is a key national security issue. We're right now trying to work with the National Security Council and the Pentagon, and frankly, Department of Energy and Homeland Security on this issue. We've been meeting with members of Congress, and we are trying to push for a clear recognition that this issue is a threat issue.
Last question. I could talk to you for hours because you're a fascinating guy. When you talk to members of Congress, does it fall on deaf ears, or are they getting it?
No, it depends on who it is. Full disclosure, look, I met with Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii within the last 2 weeks.
She's a Democratic.
Democratic, but she's very much concerned about the fact that the North Koreans offer a real threat against her people. So she is putting their protection first. And then I was in with Jim Jordan from Ohio. And Jim does take things very seriously. So I think it's more about the quality of the Congress.
How about Speaker Ryan? Does he?
Speaker Ryan is, I think, often behind the power curve of what needs to be examined. Look, I'm a big supporter of the Liberty and Freedom Caucus. I work with a number of members who are very much committed to trying to find innovative ways to stay ahead of the curve. Speaker Ryan, I think, is far too reactive, so I think that's something he could work on. So,
we know you're a busy guy, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you for you. It's great talking to you. Thank you.